Jonathan Martin, Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist for Politico, Democratic strategist Adrian Elrod, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. So great to have you all here before we gear up for a big election day. But J-Mart, let me start with you. This interview with Governor Gavin Newsom, we covered a lot of ground. Yes. What were your key takeaways from what we heard?
Somebody who's a lot happier talking about today rather than yesterday or tomorrow. He's thrilled to talk about this ballot measure, its chances for success, and let's be honest, that it's going to elevate him to the front of the line as the leader of the opposition and the early frontrunner going into 2028. This is also, I think, someone who feels liberated, Kristen. Think about this for a minute. He was a young, hotshot mayor 2 decades ago in San Francisco. He then has to wait in line for 8 long years behind Jerry Brown. He then sees Joe Biden standing in his way. He then faces the possibility of Kamala Harris standing in his way until the 2030s. Think about what's happened now in the last year. Those obstacles have cleared. Biden's out of the way, Harris probably out of the way, and it's potentially an open race in 28.
You know, Adrian, it's such a fascinating point because he did seem liberated in various moments, including his discussion and decision to stand by former President Biden until the end. Notably, we heard from former Vice President Kamala Harris this week, who said, while she thinks the campaign was tough for President Biden, she actually thinks he could have served another 4 years. What is the right answer? What are voters, do you think, going to be looking for in 2020?
Well, I think the right answer is speaking from the heart and speaking from experience, which is what you saw Gavin Newsom just do very effectively. He talked about his experience with President Biden, that, you know, he sort of reminded him of a father-son relationship. He talked about his record. He proudly talked about all the work that President Biden did when he was president, but then he pivoted and moved on. And that is where I also think the voters are going to be going into 27, 28. They're focused on the future. They're focused on the issues that matter to them. Affordability, of course, is a key issue that is front and center in the Tuesday elections. They're focused on protecting health care, which, of course, is why you're seeing Leader Jeffries and Leader Schumer really making sure their caucus is standing strong on that issue. They're focused on the future. They're not necessarily focused on, you know, the past and whether or not they believe that President Biden was fit to serve. They are. And you look at the deep bench of surrogates who are traveling right now on the campaign trail. You see a lot of people who are the future of the party, like Governor Shapiro, of course, our rock star surrogate, like President Obama, too. But I think people are focused on the future, and that is going to be front and center going into the midterms and into 27, 28.
Well, Matt, of course, Governor Newsom's big battle, and as J-Mart is saying, inextricably linked to Prop 50, which would allow Democrats in that state to add extra Democratic seats. It's a response to Texas Republicans adding additional seats there. Given the confidence you hear from Governor Newsom, given that this seems to be shaping up for a tit-for-tat battle with all of these other states getting in on the mix, are Republicans saying that this was the right fight for President Trump?
Well, let me just say really quick, when it comes to next in 2028, we've all been through presidential primaries. 90% of the time you agree on policy. So if somebody's up on the debate stage of the campaign trail defending Biden or Harris, another candidate's going to use that as a wedge issue or as a moment to draw a contrast on judgment, authenticity, whatever it is. On redistricting, right, this started in Wisconsin when Democrats brought that suit to redraw some of the Republicans out. Obviously, Texas followed about a month or so afterwards. But I think California will supercharge the urgency in a lot of these state capitals. You saw in Illinois when they talked about redrawing the maps, Hakeem Jeffries went there. Suddenly, Indiana, which had been dragging their feet, got in line real quick. I expect to see coming out of California, look at maybe Florida, Kansas, even Nebraska, Virginia on the Democratic side. It's going to turbocharge a lot of these states that were dragging their feet.
Yeah, Mel, this is all about Republicans' attempts to hold on to the House, Democrats trying to win it back. The math actually gets quite difficult for Democrats as Matt is kind of laying out all of these other states. Talk a little bit about how this shapes up in terms of which party ultimately will have the advantage heading into the midterms.
Well, I think it's actually a jump ball right now. We have to see how some of these other states really shake out. Ultimately, I do believe Republicans will walk away probably with a slight edge in terms of redistricting.
Okay.
That being said, they really blew their opportunity in California to beat back this Democratic effort to even the playing field. Newsom did a very effective job of making this a referendum on Trump, a fight about Trump, instead of the much more nuanced question of independent redistricting. And meanwhile, a Republican actually pointed this out to me. Not only has Newsom raised his national profile and made himself positioning himself as sort of the face of the effort in the Democratic Party to take on Trump. He has also expanded his donor base. He has all these new emails and donor lists that are going to really well serve him if he does run in 2028.
All of this going on against the backdrop of this government shutdown, the second longest in U.S. history. Our NBC News poll showing that more Americans are pointing the finger at Republicans right now. How does this play heading into Tuesday and beyond?
I think any polling question in American politics today is basically a referendum on President Trump. And I think people generally are sour on the president now, and so they tend to blame him for the shutdown. I actually feel a little bit of optimism about a reopen for a convergence of reasons. First of all, Tuesday's election day. It gives Democrats some good news. It could be a circuit breaker, I think, potentially. Also, you have open enrollment right now in health care plans. You also have the SNAP issue tied up in the courts now. That potentially could be a factor if folks cannot get food to eat. I think the convergence of those things, plus just the fact that it's about to be the longest shutdown in history, I think could be a motivating factor to get people back to the table next week.
Well, and Mel, you have been at these food banks. You've talked to some of these people waiting in line. I mean, how much of a pressure point, as Jay Marta is saying, is that for lawmakers to get to the table and figure this out?
It really does feel like an unsustainable situation. I've been at these food banks talking to federal workers who have never been at a food bank before and can't put food on their table right now. So I think the risk for Democrats is that at some point the SNAP issue, the air travel issue starts to overwhelm the healthcare issue. I agree with Jamar. I think after the election, we'll probably see some movement. Both parties were already getting antsy last week. The question is, how do Democrats get out of this looking like they got something? How does the White House look like they didn't give anything away? The contours of that are not clear to me at the moment. I do think we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel.
Always the challenge. The president's saying, go nuclear, get rid of the filibuster so Republicans can reopen the government by themselves.
You know, and Republicans have said very publicly that's not going to happen, even privately to me. It's not going to happen. And Trump has said this before. I think, though, this did shift the Overton window a little bit. There's a first mover advantage. Every Democrat is either voted for or campaigned on gutting this thing as soon as they get back in power. So not doing this, say, in the middle of Congress for a temporary CR, but I wouldn't be surprised next Congress after. Again, there's a first mover advantage when Democrats are already said they're going to do it.
Adrian, Democrats are underwater in their approval rating. Was this the right fight for them to pick? Could it backfire at this critical moment where they may gain some momentum on Tuesday?
Absolutely, it was the right fight. I mean, look, Republicans are in control of the House, Senate, and the White House. Democrats have very little leverage right now, so they have to use whatever power they can, and they are using this as a way to ensure that Americans that their health care is protected. Now, I do think that Tuesday's elections are going to go very well for Democrats. I think that's going to give us some real staying power and some ammunition to be able to go in and say, all right, like, Republicans come to the table. You guys are underwater. Sorry, cover. Sorry, cover. But I think it's going to be a way. I think it's going to force the issue. I think again that Democrats and Republicans will come together because ultimately, at the end of the day, Democrats are going to be in a much better situation, and we have to protect health care for Americans.
All right, guys, great conversation, but stick around because we've got a lot more when we come back. President Trump